In the winter of 1873, young Mary Thompson lived with her parents on a small farm in Nebraska. She was only 10 years old, with bright blue eyes and golden hair that her mother braided each morning. The Thompsons were simple people who worked hard and believed in helping others. Mary loved living on the farm with her mother Elizabeth and her father William every morning. She would help her mother collect eggs from the chickens and feed the pigs in the evenings. She would sit by the warm fireplace and listen to her father read stories from his big book. The farm was small, but it was filled with love and laughter. The winter of 1873 was one of the coldest winters anyone could remember. Snow covered the ground like a thick white blanket, and the wind made scary sounds as it blew round their little house. Mary's mother would make hot soup every day to keep the family warm, and her father would chop extra wood for the fireplace. Mary had her own special room upstairs where she kept her doll and her favorite books. Her grandmother had given her a beautiful quilt before she died. It was made of soft patches of blue and yellow fabric, and it always made Mary feel safe and loved when she wrapped it around herself. One cold February night, the worst blizzard of the winter hit their farm. The wind howled like a wild animal, and snow piled high against their windows. Mary could hear the wind shaking the walls of their house, and it sounded very frightening. Her mother lit extra candles to make the house feel warmer and safer. "I need to go check on the animals," William told his wife Elizabeth. "The storm's very bad, and I want to make sure they are safe in the barn." Mary's father put on his thick coat and boots. He wrapped a scarf round his face to protect him from the cold wind and snow. Elizabeth gave him a lantern to help him see in the dark storm. "Be careful, William," Elizabeth said with worry in her voice. "This storm is worse than any we have seen before." Mary pressed her face against the cold window and watched her father walk toward the barn. The snow was falling so hard that she could barely see him through the white storm. She said a little prayer that her father would be safe and that their animals would be warm enough in the barn. After what seemed like a very long time, Mary saw the light from her father's lantern coming back toward the house. But something was different. Her father was walking very slowly, and it looked like he was helping someone else walk through the deep snow. When the door opened, cold wind and snow blew into the warm house. Mary's father came inside, but he was not alone. He was supporting a man who looked very sick and hurt. The stranger had dark skin and long black hair. His clothes were torn and dirty, and Mary could see blood on his shirt. "Elizabeth," William called to his wife, "come quickly. There's a man here who needs our help." Mary peeked round the corner from where she was hiding and saw her father supporting a Native American man who was badly hurt. The man's clothes were torn, and he was bleeding from wounds on his chest and arm. He could barely stand on his own feet, and his breathing sounded very difficult. Elizabeth hurried over to help her husband. When she saw the wounded man, her face showed both concern and fear. Mary knew that many people in their area were afraid of Native Americans, and there had been fighting between the settlers and the tribes. "William, this could bring trouble to our family." Her mother Elizabeth whispered quietly, for the wounded man could not hear. "The soldiers and other settlers won't understand why we helped him. They might think we are taking sides against them." But William shook his head firmly. He looked at his wife with determination in his eyes. "This man is dying. Elizabeth, we cannot let him freeze to death outside a door. It would not be right. God tells us to help people who are suffering, no matter who they are or where they come from." Mary watched as her parents carefully carried the wounded man toward their barn. The man was very weak and could not walk by himself. His head hung down, and Mary could see that he was in great pain. Her parents moved slowly and gently so they would not hurt him more. In the barn, William and Elizabeth made a soft bed out of clean hay. They covered the wounded man with their old blankets and tried to make him as comfortable as possible. The man's breathing was shallow and quick, and his skin was pale as the snow outside. Mary could tell that he was very sick and might die if they did not take good care of him. "Will he be okay, Papa?" Mary asked softly. Standing in the doorway of the barn, she felt scared but also curious about the mysterious stranger. Her father put his big, warm hand on her small shoulder and looked down at her with kind eyes. "We will do everything we can to help him, little one. That's what good people do. When someone is hurt and needs help, we don't ask questions about who they are or where they come from. We just help them because it's the right thing to do." Mary nodded, understanding that her parents were doing something very important and brave. For the next 2 days, Mary's parents took turns caring for the wounded man. Her mother, Elizabeth, cleaned his wounds with warm water and soft cloth. She was very gentle and careful not to hurt him more. Her father, William, sat with him through the long, cold nights, making sure he was breathing and trying to give him small sips of water when he was awake. Daughter Elizabeth would heat water on the stove and carry it out to the barn in a big bowl. She would wash the man's cuts and put clean bandages on them. The wounds were deep and looked very painful, but Elizabeth had helped sick animals before, so she knew how to take care of injuries. William would take his turn sitting beside the man when Elizabeth needed to rest. He would read his Bible quietly and sometimes sing old songs that his own father had taught him. Even though the wounded man could not understand the words, the soft sounds seemed to bring him some comfort. Mary wanted to help too, but her parents told her she was too young to help with the man's wounds. However, they let her bring him soup that her mother made. Elizabeth would make warm chicken soup with vegetables from their garden, and Mary would carry it out to the barn in a small bowl. The little girl would sit quietly beside the wounded man and watch him try to eat the soup. Sometimes he was too weak to hold the spoon, so Mary would help him by holding the bowl steady. She was very careful not to spill any of the warm soup. Even though the man could not speak English very well, Mary talked to him anyway. She told him about her favorite doll, which had yellow hair just like hers. She described her cat, Whiskers, who liked to sleep by the fireplace and catch mice in the barn. Mary also talked about the flowers she planned to plant in the spring when the snow melted away. "I want to plant sunflowers this year," Mary would say, sitting cross-legged on the hay beside him. "They grow very tall and have big yellow faces that follow the sun across the sky. My mother says they look happy all the time." The wounded man would listen to her sweet voice, and sometimes Mary thought she could see a tiny smile on his pale face, even when he was too tired to open his eyes. Mary noticed that his breathing seemed calmer when she talked to him. On the second night, the temperature dropped even lower than before. The wind outside made loud whistling sounds, and Mary could hear it rattling the walls of the barn. When she went out to bring the man his evening soup, she noticed something that made her heart feel sad. The wounded man was shivering very badly. His whole body was shaking, and his lips were turning blue from the cold. The old blankets that her parents had covered him with were not keeping him warm enough. Mary could see that he was suffering from the terrible cold, and she knew that being so cold would make it harder for him to get better. Mary looked at the man shivering under the thin, worn blankets, and then she thought about her own warm bed. Back in the house, she remembered her special quilt that her grandmother had made for her before she died. It was the most beautiful quilt Mary had ever seen, with soft patches of blue and yellow fabric that reminded her of sunny days and blue skies. Her grandmother had spent many months making that quilt, sewing each piece by hand with tiny, perfect stitches. Before her grandmother died, she had given the quilt to Mary and told her it was made with love and would always keep her safe and warm. Mary treasured that quilt more than any of her other possessions, without asking anyone for permission. Mary made a decision that came straight from her heart. She quietly walked back to the house and up to her bedroom. She carefully took her precious quilt from her bed, holding it close to her chest for a moment. The quilt smelled like her grandmother's lavender soap and felt soft against her cheek. Mary carried the beautiful quilt out to the cold barn. She approached the wounded man very quietly, trying not to wake him if he was sleeping. Gently, she placed her grandmother's quilt over the sick man, tucking it carefully round his shoulders and making sure it covered him completely. The warmth from the thick, soft quilt seemed to help immediately. The man's shivering began to slow down, and Mary could see that his breathing became easier. After a few minutes, the wounded man opened his dark eyes and looked directly at Mary, even though he was still in great pain. His eyes filled with tears when he saw what the little girl had done for him. He understood that she had given him something very special and precious. With great effort, he reached out with his weak hand and gently touched Mary's small fingers. "Thank you," he whispered in broken English, his voice barely audible. "You good child." Mary smiled at him with the pure, innocent smile that only children have. She patted his hand gently and said, "My grandma made this for me, but you need it more right now." A few minutes later, when William and Elizabeth came to check on their patient, they found Mary sitting beside him. When they saw their daughter's precious quilt covering the wounded man, they were completely amazed by their child's selfless kindness. Elizabeth knelt down beside Mary and hugged her tight against her chest. Tears filled her eyes. She looked at her generous daughter. "Mary, you have the biggest heart of anyone I know," Elizabeth said with emotion in her voice. The wounded man's name was Running Bear, and he was the son of a great chief. When he was strong enough to speak more clearly, he told the Thompson family about himself through simple words and hand movements. Running Bear explained that his father was the leader of many people, and that he had been traveling when the soldiers found him. For 3 more days, the Thompson family cared for Running Bear like he was their own family member. Elizabeth would bring him fresh water every few hours and change his bandages twice a day. William would help him sit up when he needed to drink or eat. Being very careful not to hurt his healing wounds, Mary spent hours sitting with Running Bear. In the warm barn, she would bring her favorite picture books and show him the drawings of animals and flowers, even though Running Bear could not read English. He enjoyed looking at the colorful pictures. Mary would point to each drawing and tell him what it was called in English. She showed him pictures of horses, and Running Bear's eyes would light up because he loved horses very much. Mary showed him pictures of birds, and Running Bear would make soft whistling sounds like the birds made. When Mary showed him pictures of flowers, Running Bear would smile and touch the pages gently with his finger. Mary also sang him the lullabies her mother sang to her when she was scared or sad. She had a sweet, soft voice that made Running Bear feel peaceful. Even though he could not understand all the words, the gentle music helped him rest better and made his pain feel less terrible, even though they spoke different languages. Mary and Running Bear found ways to understand each other. They would point to things and teach each other new words. Running Bear would point to his chest and say his name slowly, and Mary would repeat it until she could say it correctly. Running Bear taught Mary how to say friend in his language. The word sounded very different from English, but Mary practiced saying it over and over until she could say it perfectly. When she finally said it right, Running Bear smiled the biggest smile she had seen from him. Mary taught Running Bear how to say thank you in English, though he already knew those words well from listening to her family. She also taught him how to say please and good morning. Running Bear was a very good student and remembered the new words quickly each day. Running Bear grew a little stronger. At first, he could only drink small sips of water and could not eat any solid food. But slowly, he began to eat the soup Elizabeth made for him. The warm soup seemed to give him energy and help his body heal faster. After for days, Running Bear could sit up for short periods of time without help. William would pile hay behind his back to support him, and Running Bear would sit up and look round the barn. He seemed happy to be able to see more than just the ceiling above his bed. Running Bear told them through simple words and hand movements that he had been hurt in a fight with Soul. Dears, he used his hands to show how the soldiers had chased him and how he had been wounded. But he was very clear that he did not want revenge against the soldiers or anyone else. He only wanted to heal from his wounds and go home to his people. I want peace, Running Bear would say in his broken English. No more fighting. Just want to go home to my family. William nodded and put his hand on Running Bear's shoulder. You are safe here, William told him with kindness in his voice. Stay as long as you need to heal. We will take care of you until you are strong enough to travel. Mary noticed that Running Bear always kept her grandmother's quilt close to him. Even when he was sitting up, it seemed to bring him comfort during the worst moments of pain. When his wounds hurt badly, he would hold the soft fabric in his hands and close his eyes. One evening, when Mary was sitting beside him and reading one of her picture books out loud, Running Bear looked at her with serious eyes. He touched the beautiful quilt that covered his legs and spoke to her. Your blanket has magic, Running Bear told Mary, speaking slowly so she could understand every word. It carries love. Mary giggled at the idea of her quilt being magical. She had never thought of it that way before. That's just Grandma's love sewn right into it, she said with her sweet smile. She made it with her own hands and put all her love for me into every stitch. As the days passed, something wonderful began to happen. The whole family began to see Running Bear not as a stranger or someone to be afraid of, but as a friend who needed their help. They started to look forward to spending time with him and hearing his stories about his people and his homeland. They shared meals together when Running Bear was strong enough to sit at their kitchen table. William would bring a chair out to the barn, and they would eat together like a family. William even taught Running Bear a few more words in English, while Running Bear taught them words in his language. Elizabeth learned how to say mother in Running Bear's language, and William learned how to say father. Mary learned how to say little sister, which made Running Bear smile because he said that was what he would call her. But they all knew that this peaceful time could not last forever. Running Bear was getting stronger every day, and soon he would be well enough to return to his own people. On the 7th morning, William Thompson woke up earlier than usual. Something felt different in the air. Though he could not explain what it was, he got out of bed quietly, trying not to wake Elizabeth, and walked to the kitchen window to look outside at their farm. What he saw made his heart stop beating for a moment. Outside their small farmhouse, as far as his eyes could see, stood 200 Native American warriors on horseback. The sight was so shocking that William had to blink several times to make sure he was not dreaming. The warriors were painted for a wall with red and black stripes on their faces and bodies. They carried weapons like bows and arrows, spears, war clubs. Their horses stood perfectly still. Like statues made of stone, the warriors sat on their horses without moving or making any sound at all. William felt his hands begin to shake, because he stared out the window. Never in his life had he seen so many warriors in one place. They filled the entire area around his farm, standing in perfect rows like soldiers. But strangely, they were not attacking or making threatening gestures. They simply sat there in complete silence. "Elizabeth, Mary, come here quickly." William called to his family, trying to keep his voice calm but urgent. Elizabeth jumped out of bed when she heard the worry in her husband's voice. She rushed to the kitchen, still wearing her nightgown, with her hair loose round her shoulders. When she saw the hundreds of warriors outside, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Mary heard her father calling and ran downstairs from her bedroom. She was still wearing her white nightgown, and her golden hair was messy from sleep. When she reached the kitchen, she pressed her small face against the cold window glass to see what her parents were looking at. Mary had never seen so many people at once in her entire life. The sight was amazing and frightening at the same time. Her heart beat very fast as she looked at all the painted warriors on their beautiful horses. But strangely, she was not afraid. Something in her heart told her that these people had not come to hurt her family. "What do they want, Papa?" Mary asked, looking up at her father with her big blue eyes. William put his arm round his daughter and pulled her close to him. He looked out at the warriors and tried to think of what to do. He had his rifle, but one gun would be useless against so many men. All he could do was wait and see what would happen. Before William could answer his daughter's question, they heard footsteps approaching their front door. The family turned to see Running Bear walking slowly toward their house. He was still weak from his injuries, but he could walk on his own now. His wounds had healed enough that he no longer needed to stay in bed all day. Behind Running Bear came an older man who looked very important and powerful. He had grey hair that was braided with colorful beads and feathers. His dark eyes were kind, but also very wise. Like someone who had seen many things in his long life, he wore a great feathered headdress that showed he was a chief or leader of great importance. The older man walked with dignity and strength, even though he was not young anymore. His clothes were made of soft leather decorated with beautiful beadwork and painted designs. Round his neck, he wore a necklace made of bear claws and silver medallions. Running Bear reached the door of the Thompson house and knocked gently. William opened the door carefully, still not sure what to expect. Running Bear smiled at the family and stepped inside, followed by the important older man. "This is my father, Chief White Eagle," Running Bear said in his best English, speaking slowly so the family could understand every word. "He comes to thank you." Chief White Eagle was much taller than Running Bear and had a commanding presence that filled the small kitchen. But when he looked at the Thompson family, his eyes were gentle and kind. He stepped forward and began to speak in his own language, using a deep, strong voice that sounded like distant thunder. Running Bear listened carefully to his father's words and then translated them for the Thompson family. "My father says that word has spread among all the tribes about what you did for me, especially about the little girl who gave her sacred blanket to a dying enemy." Mary looked confused when she heard Running Bear call himself an enemy. She tilted her head to one side and looked up at him with innocent eyes. "But you're not my enemy. You're my friend." Running Bear smiled warmly at Mary's words and quickly translated what she had said to his father. When Chief White Eagle heard his son's translation, his stern face broke into the biggest, kindest smile anyone had ever seen. The old chief's whole face changed, and his eyes twinkled with joy and amazement. Chief White Eagle knelt down on one knee so that he could look directly into Mary's eyes at a level. He spoke to her very gently in his own language, and his voice was soft and full of warmth. He says you have the heart of a true warrior," Running Bear explained to Mary. "Not a warrior who fights with weapons, but a warrior who fights with love, Chief." White Eagle stood up and walked back outside. He raised his hand high in the air and spoke loudly to all the warriors who were waiting silently on their horses. When they heard their chief's words, every single warrior raised his weapon high, above his head. "We did not come for war," Running Bear said to the Thompson family. "We came to honor you." What happened next became a story that people would tell for many, many years. The event that took place on that cold February morning would be remembered and shared by both Native American tribes and white settlers for generations to come. Chief White Eagle looked down at little Mary with eyes full of respect and gratitude. He slowly reached up and took off his own beautiful blanket that he had been wearing round his shoulders. The blanket was made from the softest buffalo hide that had been carefully prepared and treated. Until it felt like silk, it was decorated with hundreds of colorful beads in patterns of red, blue, yellow, and green that told the story of his family and his tribe. The chief held the precious blanket in his strong hands and spoke to Running Bear in their native language. Running Bear listened carefully to his father's words and then turned to explain to Mary what the gift meant through Running Bear. Chief White Eagle told Mary that this blanket was made by his own wife many years ago when they were first married. She had spent an entire winter working on it, sewing each bead by hand with love and care. The blanket was very precious to his family and had been worn only during the most important ceremonies and celebrations. "This is for you, little one," Chief White Eagle said as Running Bear translated his words carefully. "Your blanket saved my son's body from the cold and helped him heal. This blanket will protect your soul and bring you good fortune for the rest of your life." Mary accepted the gift with wonder and amazement. Her small hands could barely hold the large, heavy blanket. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her entire life. The beadwork sparkled in the morning sunlight, and the buffalo hide was softer than anything she had ever touched. She looked up at the great chief with tears in her blue eyes. "Thank you," Mary whispered, holding the blanket close to her chest. "I will take care of it always." Then Chief White Eagle made a promise that amazed everyone who was listening. He stood up tall and spoke in a loud, strong voice that carried across the farmyard to all the warriors who were still sitting silently on their horses. The chief declared that the Thompson family would forever be under the protection of his tribe. Any member of their family could travel safely through native lands, and they would always be welcomed with honor and respect. No harm would ever come to them from his people or any of the tribes that followed his leadership. William and Elizabeth looked at each other in amazement. They had never heard of such a promise being made to white settlers before. This meant that they and their children and their children's children would always be safe when traveling through Indian territory. But the greatest gift was yet to come. Chief White Eagle raised his hand for silence and made an announcement that would change the lives of everyone in that area forever. The chief announced that because of Mary's kindness and pure heart, his tribe would make peace with the settlers in their area. There would be no more fighting between his people and the white families who lived on farms nearby. No more fear, no more raids, no more bloodshed between the two peoples. One little girl's love has done what all the soldiers and treaties could not do, Chief White Eagle said through Running Bear's translation. She has built a bridge between our peoples that will last forever. Her kindness has shown us that white people and Indian people can live together in peace. The chief explained that Mary's simple act of giving her precious blanket to a wounded stranger had proven that love was stronger than hate, and kindness was more powerful than weapons. Because she had treated his son as a human being who needed help, Rather than as an enemy to be feared, she had opened the door to understanding between their two worlds. As the warriors prepared to leave, Running Bear walked over to Merry one last time. He knelt down and wrapped his arms round her in a gentle hug. Tears ran down his face as he spoke to her. "I will never forget you, little sister." Running Bear said in English that was now much better than when he had first arrived. "Wherever I go, I will tell people about the white girl with the golden heart who saved an Indian's life. Your story will be told around campfires for many generations." Merry hugged him back tightly. "I will never forget you either, Running Bear. You will always be my friend." The warriors mounted their horses and rode away across the snowy fields, leaving the Thompson family standing in front of their small farmhouse holding the precious blankets that represented the bridge between two different worlds. Years later, Mary grew up and married a kind man who loved her gentle heart. She had children of her own, and later grandchildren who would sit on her rocking chair in the evenings. Mary would tell them this story and show them both blankets, the one her grandmother had made with love, and the one Chief White Eagle had given her with gratitude. Remember, Mary would always say to her children and grandchildren, kindness is the most powerful thing in the world. When we choose love over fear, miracles can happen. Never judge people by how they look or where they come from. Judge them by what is in their hearts, and the miracles did happen. The peace between the tribes and settlers in that area lasted for generations. All because one little girl chose to share her blanket with someone who needed it. The end.